Call to order Committee on Finance and Property. Call to order Committee of the Whole. Good evening, everybody. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chair.
Folks. All right, so tonight we'll continue with our FY25 city budget hearings. Tonight we'll start with Darlene Wynn in our planning department. I guess counselors, if you have questions as we go, let's ask them. And with that, Ms. Wynn, if you want to get started.
Ready?
So quick. Let's jump right in. Thank you all for having me. My budget every year has been fairly standard and straightforward. Changes are very minimal. There's been some increases overall, obviously in salaries as those naturally increase, the cost of the Beverly shuttle shows as an increase over actual from this year. And then there's some reductions as well in other lines to compensate. The overall budget change is less than 3% increase. So I think we've made some cuts in necessary places in order to accomplish increases in other places or accommodate increases in other places. Particularly, we did cut the consulting line a little bit as we've been able to get more grants to help out and then hopefully getting some grants for some anticipated projects. I don't have anything too flashy or exciting to present on this budget. It's pretty straightforward, so I'm happy to entertain any questions that you might have.
One question I had was on the consulting line. What are you using that for this year? What do you anticipate using that for?
So included in the consulting line is membership fees for organizations, so North Shore TMA, and possibly another business-related organization. So did that just go off? Okay. And then let's see, it's 45. So about 40,000 of that I expect to use towards consulting and or match. And we do anticipate using 10,000 of that as match for the sign ordinance update, which we were awarded a grant for last year. And now finally have a consultant ready to go under or start negotiating under contract. And we added $10,000 of consulting line to that. It won't start until next year, but because we had difficulty finding a consultant, so we increased the price a little bit above and beyond what the budget was from the grant. And then we applied for 2 other grants that we are holding over for using potential match as well for those, but hopefully we may or may not need that. But if we also are planning on, or I'm planning on engaging UTIL to make a couple of edits that are necessary for the design standards package prior to submitting that, which hopefully you will learn more about at the next city council meeting. And so I expect to need to use some of the consulting line in order to reconcile things that have changed since that package was prepared and prior to submitting that to council.
Thank you. Councilor Bowen, question?
Thank you. I had a similar question because I'm trying to focus in on sort of, especially for level funding for departments this year, but all the staff positions filled, sort of what we can expect. So I really appreciated that there are goals in the budget book that we could look at and see what to expect. My question around the consultant budget line was when we talked last year about how that might be spent, it included the sign ordinance, the design standards, and MBTA Communities Act compliance. So sounds like both the design standards and sign ordinance will be in next year's budget. So for the 47,000 from this past year, was that mainly around the MBTA Communities compliance or other projects?
No, we were actually the state was actually very great about providing free technical assistance for all of the necessary analyses, which I'll also learn about at hopefully the next meeting, for the MBTA Communities compliance. That was actually required a lot of analysis and outside support, but thankfully all of that was provided to most communities at no charge. Some communities did pay for that, but for a community like us, where we didn't we're not planning on completely revamping our zoning ordinance as a result of this. We didn't need to pay for anything. Ultimately, we did end up allocating the majority of our consulting line from this year towards the planning department's onboarding for for online permitting. So it was not anticipated because we thought we were going to be in the original package, but we needed additional money to onboard the planning department into the new online permitting system that the building and health department are using. And so that is where we allocated our consulting money for this year.
Thank you. If I may.
Follow-up question, go ahead.
Yes, and it may or may not actually be for now to answer, but I think in last budget meeting, we saw where the OpenGov licensing fell in the budget, and it's like $90,000 or so. And I would love to hear at some point about how that works with or doesn't work with the other system we have that I always forget the name of.
Central Square.
Central Square, and sort of where we are with that technology overall, both cost-wise and value-wise. But, so I don't know from the planning board's perspective if it's made things easier, smoother.
I hope so. So from my perspective, I mean, like 95% of the municipalities, from a planning perspective, use is it ClearGov? I get confused with so many. So it's a more natural fit for this type of permitting that we do. The Central Square was kind of trying, like fitting a square peg into a round hole for us in a lot of ways, and we hadn't fully integrated into it. So it makes more sense for us to align with the building department in terms of how we review development projects and those things. And so we're just getting started on onboarding that, hoping that will be a 4-month, hopefully it won't take us as long because they've already worked out a lot of the kinks, so.
Thank you. Counselor Feldman. Your microphone, please.
Thanks. When it comes to the shuttle bus service line item, is that just CATA? And where is the Salem Skipper? Do we have a contribution that we make to the Salem Skipper service?
Yes, so the shuttle bus line out of my budget is straightforward for the Beverly shuttle, which is contracted with CATA, Cape Ann Transit Authority, Cape Ann Transit Operating Management Company. And we've been funding that for 20 years through our budget, and then partially reimbursed, or there's also a partial reimbursement of services from the MBTA, because it's a supplemental grant, a supplemental transportation grant program. And then, so that's there. That's one piece. And I know I heard either the mayor or Bryant address this, I think, in the mayor's presentation on Monday night, but and then there's the Salem Skipper piece, and we're funding a local contribution of $131,000. That is ARPA money, I think we've dedicated for that, so that's a separate pot of money. As we pilot that Skipper and look at the data from the shuttle and look at the COA, we're starting a project and we've started conversations about, okay, what are the efficiencies and how do we, what's the best type of service, what's the best combination of service for transit, acknowledging all the needs and assessing the type of data that we get. We're still in the process of collecting that data and usage data. So it's going to be an ongoing project, but a decision we have to make before the 2-year pilot of the shuttle comes up.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else for the planning director? Mr. Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I know I'm running late, so if you responded to any of these already, you can just tell me and I'll watch the BevCam footage afterwards. But I have a question about the consulting line, which is more or less level funded for previous fiscal years, but I'm curious, some of the potential services flagged or housing needs analysis and economic development strategy support, which I know you mentioned in the ECDC meeting we had the other day. Could you maybe elaborate on, if you haven't already?
Yeah, well, I'll just, we intend to use the consulting line, so a small portion of it, $5,000, goes to our membership of the North Shore Alliance Economic Development Association. And then the remaining 40,000, which is a slight reduction from previous years, 10,000 of that will be a match for the sign ordinance, which we needed to increase the budget of that in order to get a consultant to sign on. And that leaves $30,000, which we may use as match for 2 grants that we just completed applications for in 1 or 2 grants in the latest one-stop round, which were due on Wednesday. So it's kind of yet to be determined, but I also plan to and would like to hold some of that money, or actually use some of that consulting line earlier to make some modifications to the design standards based on the zoning changes we made since those were drafted, the height changes particularly. I think that's a small amount of money, but some of those graphics are things that we can't change ourselves, and so have them update the package before that gets submitted.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you, Ms. Nguyen.
Yep.
And the other question I have for your department budget, but is one that kind of carries through a handful of the departments that we're going to look at tonight, and is probably a question for Mr. Ailes, just to confirm, and looking at some of the increases to salaried positions, and I'm pretty sure they're all union positions. Can you just note that this is, I'm correct in attributing those increases to the implementation of the compensation plan analysis that was implemented this current fiscal year and is going to carry forward? Okay.
Yeah, yes.
All right, just wanted to confirm that. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Okay. Any other questions for Ms. Nguyen? Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate it. Next, we have on our agenda Allison Babin from the library. How are you tonight?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Good. So, good evening, counselors, and thank you for the opportunity to present the library's budget request for fiscal year 2025. I do want to recognize we have 2 library trustees here this evening, Mary Beverly and Joanne Panunzio, here in support of the budget, so I want to thank them. This is a level service budget, and I would like to talk a little bit about what level service means at the library, because really it means quite a lot. Before I get into that, I would also like to put our public library within a larger context and share some data points with you. Did you know that a recent Gallup poll about U.S. libraries showed that U.S. adults reported taking 10.5 trips to the library on average per year, outpacing how many times they went to the movies, live sporting events, museums, concerts, amusement parks, or casinos? Visiting the library is the top cultural activity that Americans engage in. And this aligns locally with our own usage. We have tracked 171,645 visits to the library system so far this year, with almost a month left to go. This many people could fill the seats at Fenway Park about 4.5 times, actually a little over 4.5 times. Another way to look at it, this is about 15,000 visits per month. How do we get this number? We have door counter sensors installed on each entrance, which track the figures of how many people come in and, of course, account for their exits as well. So now that I've given you a sense of how busy the libraries are, back to this idea of level service and what that means at the library. It means that for the majority of the year, the main library is open 68 hours a week, the Farms branch is open 53 hours a week, and the Bookmobile is visiting over 80 locations on a 3-week rotation. We are providing a robust physical and digital collection of books, ebooks, audiobooks, movies, magazines, even things like circulating hotspots, photo scanners, games, and so much more for people of all ages. Additionally, we're providing services ranging from Wi-Fi, study rooms, meeting room access, computer access, including printing, copying, scanning, answering reference questions. I keep looking over there because I feel like the mic is cutting out. It just does that. Okay. Okay. Answering reference questions, which includes a great deal of technology help. We provide notary service and more. Not one day goes by in the library where we're not helping people with computers and cell phones with tasks many find simple but others find quite challenging. Folks are redirected to their public library by employers to fill out job applications online, by the RMV to fill out accident report forms, by UPS to complete Amazon returns, by their insurance companies to fill out medical forms, to name just a few examples. And I wonder, if there was no public library, where would all these people go? Who would help them? Where else can they get assistance with these things? Where really can anyone go, especially indoors, and not have to spend any money? When our librarian spent an hour with Roberta last month helping her customize her resume so she could get a new job, if that librarian hadn't been there, who would have helped her? When Tony comes in, who is on a fixed budget but loves to read about military heroes, where else would he be able to get a stack of 20 books at no cost? But please understand, this is just the smallest snapshot of what public librarians do. Every interaction we have is as varied as the people we serve, from tracking down an obscure audiobook series that is only available in the state of Kentucky, to checking out all the Colleen Hoover books to the Gen Z kids that are getting excited about her because of TikTok, to loaning a metal detector to a woman who lost her wedding ring. True story, and great news, she found it. We are working with the DEIB office to partner on community events, running story times filled with 50-plus kids and caregivers. Our youth librarians are out in the public schools giving book talks and issuing library cards. We create a story walk each year and move it around the city. We host weekly meditation sessions, cookbook clubs, author talks, animal shows, not to mention the hundreds of uses of our meeting rooms by community groups. So far this year already, the library has held over 700 programs with over 10,000 attendees. With summer on the horizon, we have tons of great events. Hopefully everyone already has a copy of this coming up, including this Saturday, we have our lawn party at the Farms Branch from 1 to 3, and next Wednesday, the 12th, is summer reading kickoff on the Common from 6:30 to 8 with a DJ, lawn games, snacks, the unveiling of our new story walk, and most importantly, the ability for people of all ages to sign up for summer reading. A final note, and somewhat an acknowledgement of the recent spotlight the library has been under in regards to our HVAC issues. I do think a lot of residents take their library for granted and its services, and in some ways, they should. They deserve them. Access to information and books is a human right that everyone, regardless of income level, age, or other status, deserves to have, and that is what this library is here to deliver. We will continue offering all of these services, programs, and collections I've mentioned, and many more that I haven't, while working on our goals to continue enhancing them, making them more inclusive and accessible so that they can be enjoyed by all. Thank you again for this opportunity, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Babb.
Thank you.
Councilors, any questions or comments? Council President.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Babin, for being here, and thank you for the work that you and your team do every day. I'm just curious, you mentioned it, we've been hearing a lot about the level funding of the budgets. I'm wondering if you could share with us if there's anything that you feel like this budget doesn't allow you to do, or concerns that it raises for you, because there isn't the space to expand.
Sure. I mean, I think one area that's difficult is repairs. You'll see that the request was $50,000 this year, which is the same request as last year, and that isn't going to do any major repairs to the building. In fact, we even have some things lurking now that I would hope to be able to do with that annual appropriation, but wasn't able to. If you visited the library recently, you may have noticed there's a big panel of the fence missing, and I just don't have quite enough money to do that this fiscal year. So I'll do it next year, but you know, the buildings are aging and they have a lot of issues, so we do the best we can with what we have, but you know, it'll kind of just be the best we can do with that amount of money.
Okay.
Please.
Thank you for that. That's helpful. I was curious also, and I don't know if you can just add into this about the bookmobile, which I know you just mentioned how many visits it makes. Mm-hmm. Does the budget allow you to adequately, when you said repairs, I thought about the bookmobile as well, wear and tear on that vehicle. Can you share a little bit about how it fits into your budget and how comfortable you feel with repairs that it might need or not need?
That's a great question. So it does have its own line actually for bookmobile maintenance and fuel, which is $5,000. And similarly, it allows us to kind of patch small issues that come up with it. We have been having a challenge with the generator on the bookmobile. The bookmobile is already, believe it or not, about 12 years old. A lot of people still think of it as new, and it's getting older, and it's a custom vehicle that's quite unique. Maybe, hopefully in the future it would be electric and have less issues than it has now, given the way it runs on a generator. So that's a challenge. I hope that will be enough to keep it functioning through the year, but the generator is a cause for concern right now. It's kind of an up and down thing. Some days we think Frank's got it going and he does his best for sure, but then sometimes it has issues again.
Thank you, that's helpful, especially just knowing how many visits the bookmobile makes and that really is an extension of the arm of our library, not only visiting our schools, but visiting folks who maybe can't get to the library otherwise. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Counselor Bowen, did you have a question?
I did. It was similar, but really specifically wanted to just hear about sort of what negative impacts we might expect for having not moved forward with the HVAC plans at this time, and whether this budget creates any space, or there are plans outside of this budget to help address some of the bigger issues. Because I think it's important for us to hear the downsides of that, but also what the potential pathway is there.
Yeah, so it's definitely a lurking issue. I think our current HVAC system is kind of hanging on by a thread, and there may be some days in the summer or the winter where the library will have to close because we're not able to cool it sufficiently or heat it sufficiently. I also worry, are we going to come in one day and the air conditioning is completely dead? And what would happen then? So obviously those are bigger infrastructure questions and whatnot, but it is a concern. This budget obviously doesn't begin to address that, but hopefully we won't have that catastrophic situation.
Thank you. I had a question. I saw the book subscription line item went up about 8.4%, which seems like a really good thing. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. So this line is a state requirement for the state aid program that the library invests annually an amount of materials that is 13% of the total appropriation. So that is where that 296 figure comes from. It's just about 13% of the total figure. But it is a bigger jump, you're right to catch that. And the reason is because last year, the administration asked us to take a haircut on that line and supplement it with other funding sources, such as our Friends of the Library group or trust funds, in order to meet the requirement that year. So this year, we're hopeful to get the full appropriation here so that we have those other funds available to us for other purposes. Library programs, we use them to digitize old materials and to fill the gaps in other areas where this budget doesn't cover. I should mention, our Friends of the Library group spends about $22,000 a year to also make up that gap. So they pretty much cover all of our programming costs as well as our really popular Museum Pass program. Does that fully answer your question?
I think it does.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. Thank you, Ms.
Okay,
Bevan.
thank you very much.
Okay, with that, we will move to Mr. Doig from Parks and Recreation and, I guess, Enterprise Fund as well. How are you?
Good, how you doing? Thank you for having me. First, I want to say, I'm going to go through the recreation, but if you have any other questions about community services in general, we'll be happy to answer that. Laura Delakai from the Health Department is here because there was one question that was raised about one line item. So again, we'll be happy to answer that. So just a quick summary. I've been here, this is my 22nd summer, 22nd budget hearing. A lot going on as usual. We're getting into the busy time of season. The concerts start this Sunday with the high school and the middle school jazz bands, and hopefully the weather will be great. It'll be a great kickoff to the summer, spending Sunday nights at Lynch Park and so forth. But I just want to give you an update on some of the projects that are going on. There's a lot of them. Holcroft Park, we had a meeting last night with the neighbors, went through kind of the timeline for the project, as well as the different items that we're looking to renovate and recreate the park. And it should be a great turnaround or transition when we're done with it. The Simon Street tot lots, we have finished the work at number 14 Simon Street, which was a little easier. The 34 Simon Street, we have to address some property line issues and do some additional prep work there to be ready. We have the equipment ready to go. We have the installers on standby. Just once we get everything prepped and ready, then we'll be able to get that one done, hopefully early summer, certainly by midsummer. The signage project has been a long time coming, but our goal is to replace all of the wayfinding signs in the city or add wayfinding signs to a lot of the parks. And they're all going to be consistent color and size and shape, in addition to regulatory signs in all the parks. And again, they will be consistent with the design that we came up with many years ago, but we're working with the vendor now to implement phase one in the not too distant future. The island program, Beverly and Bloom, we have several new folks this year adding to the list of islands that are being maintained. And so some of the newer folks are just getting started because they had to get signs made and so forth. But again, the islands are starting to bloom and look great. And we are trying to stay on top of that year after year to make sure they're being maintained going forward. Gillis Park, we had a CPC grant for, a small grant for 3 pieces or 3 changes. We've implemented 2 of those. If you've been to the park, there's a new ADA compliant spinner that was just added last week. And we've added a picnic table, ADA compliant picnic table. We have a little bit of a challenge with the bottle filling station because there's talk of doing additional work at the park and changing the entryway, which is where the current, if you want to call it a bubbler, is situated. So we need to look at, do we want to remodel that entryway now to make it ADA compliant, or do we want to wait until some additional work is done? I know there was an earmark suggested for Gillis Park that hopefully we'll be able to do some work in the not too distant future and implement the bottle filling station with that work, because that was part of their design, was to put the bottle filling station in the entryway area, make the entryway much more ADA compliant. The tennis courts at Cove and Cahill, if you haven't driven by there, there's binder coat down. They had to build the retaining wall at Cove. That took a little extra time, but the binder went down yesterday, the day before, and looks great. And so now the next step is to get the fence posts up, then they'll put the top coat on, then they'll put the fencing up, and then they'll finish it by installing the nets. So we're hoping, there does have to be a 3-week lag between the installation of the top level and the painting, because they need to let the asphalt cure a little bit so it can be painted. So we're looking around early to mid-July to have those courts completely done. And that'll add to our inventory. We currently we've had 12 courts in Beverly, 12 tennis courts in Beverly, which are, years ago were not in great shape. And we've improved Aubert, we've improved several others. Now these 3 additional courts will be back to having 12 very usable, functional courts. And we also have 12 pickleball courts. With the addition of the 4 up at Birch Plains. So some of them are multi-purpose, pickleball and tennis, but we do have a total of 12 on each side. The basketball hoops at Lindsay have been completed. The basketball hoops at Dix Park, as Councilor St. Hilaire knows well, we had a huge water problem down there with all the rain we received in the spring. We were trying to dig the holes to put the new hoops in, and they were just constantly filling with water. I went by there the other day, and most of that seems to be resolved. So we'll be installing those shortly and hopefully get those done. The AEDs, again, a project I'm very proud of. We have already purchased, we already have 18, we're getting another 6, which will bring us to 24 out of 37 parks. We're working with DPS to get those installed Again, we'll continue raising money for the other units that we're going to need to fill out the other 13 locations to make sure we have an AED accessible in every park. But we'll get these 24 in, and we'll be most of the way there. And so that's pretty much the projects that are going on, just an overview of it applies to our budget. For the summer, we'll be staffing 11 parks again, which we have done for the last couple of years. There's a couple parks that we have not staffed recently because the numbers were down to basically zero. And so we reallocated staff and have moved things around, but we're still staffing the 11 that we've been staffing for the last couple of years. Of the summer staff that we're hiring, 24 park instructors, and that includes a director of that group, 24 camp counselors, including directors, and then 12 lifeguards and about 12 rangers. So that's a total of about 72 people. And then we're still looking for CITs. We used to have up to 45 to 50 CITs every year. And this year, last year it started, the numbers were going down, just not as many kids available, but we're hoping to have 30 to 40 CITs working in the parks with our staff. And just from a scholarship standpoint, last year we gave out about $6,000 in scholarships to 6 families. And this year we're up to 9 families and $12,000. So the need goes up every year. And that's not money, we don't have a budget for scholarships. We just comp the sessions that we give to people for scholarships because we feel it's the right thing to do. But again, the need goes up every year. So we're hoping to be able to keep pace and provide more scholarships going forward to people who need it. And we're also working with people in the school department. 2 of the recipients this year were sent to us through the school department and highly recommended for a scholarship. And so we did award those. So again, we're working on that every year, trying to do as much as we can. So other than that, again, the budgets, most of this, or all of the community service budgets, but particularly ours, most of it was additions or for contractual obligations for the union employees. And again, so that's where most of the increases came from. The Park of the Year Fund was restored to $50,000. One thing that I have found in the last several years is that the projects are getting more and more expensive. When something breaks, it costs more to replace it, both from an equipment standpoint and from finding an installer who somebody can do the work. So if you look through our budget, we have several maintenance or equipment lines, but they're just not cutting it anymore. We've gotten by for several years with multiple state earmarks that helped us do improvements at Lynch Park and other parks around the city. That money, a lot of that was put towards other projects in the last year. So we're hoping to get more money from the Park of the Year that we can continue to keep pace with the equipment that we need to restore or replace. So, any questions?
Councilor Feldman?
Yes, thank you. You started to touch base on this a little bit, but there's been obviously an extensive need for this seawall repair and discussing, but at both Lynch Park and Aubert with the rising sea levels and a lot of the repairs that have to happen with the parks. But I'm wondering in terms of the budget, there's no line item then in your budget that addresses any of those needs? Am I reading this right, that it's mostly carried through other funding sources, grants and appropriations?
Right. We paid for the new walkway that you see along the seawall going from the the concession stand out to the beach, Woodbury Beach. We paid for that last year. That was a significant hit to our budget because it was about $30,000 in concrete that we had to install. But that was part of the seawall preservation and restoration because if you remember, there was that huge trench that had been created through a number of storms. So we were able to fill that all in and get that repaired, and now there's an apron where if the water comes over, it's not going to chew away at the seawall. But going forward, the goal is that we have some grant monies. We're applying for more grant money for the seawall repair. We're completing the study with the engineering firm Tetra Tech that has been looking at all the seawalls and trying to, so they've presented some proposals and we're looking at what can be done and then we'll be figuring out how much that can cost. and where the money will come from, probably for some additional grants and other sources, so.
Mr. Mayor, it seemed like you wanted to mention something. Thank you for being with us again tonight.
Thanks. I think just to help with context on the seawall, there are some minor repairs that we want to and need to make sooner, right? We know that we can make some repairs land side of the seawall. They'll involve public services and engineering working with David Spitaler, the conservation agent in Concom. And so there'll be some, if you think about it, when you walk down towards the front beach and you look to the right of the walkway, there's some damage that needs repairing there. That's an example of work we're going to try to do in the near term. That's more modest costs, and we'll look to figure that out perhaps through the public property line and DPS and/or some resources within REC. But the bigger work that needs doing down at Lynch Park, maybe a comparable to that would be the Bridge Street Road reconstruction, right? We couldn't fund a seawall repair with operating fund money, or on its own certainly with something like some free cash. Those are going to be big fixes, and we'll be going after construction grants in time for that type of work.
Okay. As a follow-up to that, then, is there any discussion that as the ocean's not going anywhere, is there any thought to kind of building in for future planning a part of some of these impacted budgets that would have a line item for planning for those type of, because it just feels like we're behind the 8 ball if we're depending on free cash and grants when projects come along. And I feel like in terms of responsible planning for the future, there might be some thought to, not necessarily this year, but in the future. Has there been any talk of that moving forward? Or?
So, couple things. The state, if you remember, the state announced late last calendar year they were creating a new coastal resilience position at the state level. And the hope was beyond that position to get them started would be identifying some green banking opportunity at the state level for resilience and adaptation type of work, coastal flooding, inland flooding, things like that. The grant that we've been working this past year on Lynch Park, we have already, as part of the work of that consulting group, the architectural firm, they have already helped us make application for some seawall repair grant funding, right? So that funding will help complete design and go through permitting, and a next grant after that will be something we'll go after for actual construction. So I think that the answer is we're going to track and watch this. Largely, the big chunks of money are going to need to come in the form of state and federal help and grant money, I believe. The consulting lines that you see in a handful of department budgets, and that money is the kind of money that can go as a match towards these kind of grants. So, that answer you well enough for now? I'm not sure if I did, but
Yeah, that works.
okay, thanks.
What was the cost of the seawall? What is the cost of the seawall? Do we know that?
So the seawall is a big piece of infrastructure. Do we have what we're going after on that next grant funding, which is about design and permitting for some seawall repairs? And the seawall repairs we're looking at are, if I remember right, it's the front wall, kind of in front of the Rose Garden. It's right around the carriage house part. It's not so much around the point and the high part of the wall. Mike, do you want to say more?
I'm not exactly sure what the question is, but are you talking about what the future seawall is going to be?
Is there a project that we've scoped out, and if so, do we know what the cost is?
We don't have the design.
Okay.
So I can, Mike, come on up, please. I will say that our consultants they're doing some schematic design work to support some longer-term alternatives for how the park needs to look, where it's going to hold out water, where it allows water in when the ocean kind of demands it. the grant application they prepared for us for seawall repairs in the near term is focused on design and permitting. I don't think there's a price tag yet for the cost of the repairs that'll actually be permitted. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, they just haven't, it hasn't advanced that far that we could do cost estimates. But the general concept is, it's the ocean. We're never gonna win, right? Right now, the system fails occasionally. It's really about controlling how the system fails. So what happens when the water does go over the seawall, and trying to make the park as durable and recoverable from these events as possible. And as, you know, sea levels never stayed the same in the history of Earth, it's clearly gonna keep rising. We just don't know exactly how fast and when it's gonna happen, but the general concept would be to have some short-term, some mid-term, some long-term improvements, so that we know that as sea level changes, how do we have the wall and adapt? And at some point, way in the distant future, how do we start retreating from that spot because as we will from all coastal locations, truly low-lying coastal locations. So there's a lot that needs to be designed yet until we can get to a cost. But again, the concept would be a phased approach. So we'll do some things in the short term to make the park more durable during these storm events, and then in the slightly more long-term, there'll be some things that'll enhance the durability of the park even further, and then we'll have to look to see how we deal with the really extreme events that inevitably will come.
Thank you, Commissioner Collins. Okay, Counselor Spang.
Can I just add one thing? I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Mike and, you know, our entire DPS staff and my staff for the work they do every year to clean up Lynch Park after the storms throw the rocks over the wall and wash away parts of the walkways and things, because they do an amazing job. They have a ton of pride in what they do. And again, if you go down there today, you wouldn't even know we had floods, even though this was 4 floods this year and the worst that I've ever seen. So again, thank you to Mike and the group, because our staff does an amazing job. So thanks again. Sorry.
That's okay.
Counselor Spang, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll echo that thanks to everybody for keeping it usable for the public and accessible. And I just had a question, because I used to sit on the Community Preservation Committee, and I know we awarded some money towards some repairs for the carriage house, some shorter term to keep it watertight and things like that. Do you know when that might happen?
Yep. Yep.
So we struggled with that money because to be ready to spend it and spend it in a meaningful way, it was going to be rushed and it wasn't going to be sufficient. So we went to the CPC just at their last meeting and said, let's let that go. And this summer and this fall, we're going to work to design out what's going to make a meaningful difference there. And it'll cost more than that for sure. And we've got to look, when we go back to the CPC, we've got to look at some way to partner and match up some other funds with an ask. So that's where it sits. But when we made that decision just in the last few weeks, we told ourselves, let's make sure this summer we make progress on figuring out and designing the next steps for the building. The building is going to need 10 million plus. We're not ready. We don't have a funding stream identified for that, right? None of us do. And yet, so the real question is, what does the building need right now in the next year or so that'll keep it in good stead until there's been a way identified to really rehabilitate it, renovate it to where it's available for the long haul? Okay. Thanks.
Good. Counselor Sweeney, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Doig, for your presentation. I do have a question on the Park of the Year. So I know you mentioned in explaining the increase, which it's doubling essentially from 25 to 50,000. You mentioned the increased cost of equipment and some of the work that takes place out of this line, which I certainly understand. However, this, even with that explanation, seems to be a pretty significant increase. So with that in mind, I have 2 questions. Could you talk to some of the specific areas of spending that have taken place this fiscal year out of this line item? And if we're expanding the budget for this line item notably, does that mean that the scope of the type of work that we're doing instead of just maybe routine maintenance is gonna be more of a robust playground replacement, something that might be better suited for capital funding source like free cash.
Again, just to note that this budget was cut in half last year, so it went from 50 down to 25 after being at 50 for a long time. So we had a limited budget to work with last year. We did spend, we didn't have to spend money on playground surfacing last year because we were in pretty good shape there. But that's annually, we've been spending $15,000, $16,000 a year just to replace the mulch that you see under the playgrounds to keep them safe. So we'll probably be doing that again this year. We get about 6 truckloads, 100 cubic yard truckloads. And then beyond that, a lot of money last year went towards the new pickleball courts up at Birch Plains and a few other projects. When things started getting, tight a little bit, we had to allocate some money around for some of the smaller projects I was talking about. This year, with it restored back to 50, we'll hopefully be able to contribute some to the Holcroft project, to some of it, last year did go to the Simon Street tot lot projects and so forth. So again, I don't have it all spent, down to the dime level right now, but I know that there's a lot of projects that we could spend the money on, and I'm trying to use it in the areas that need it the most. And that's, the hardest part of what I'm doing or have been doing is prioritizing, because there's a lot of need for projects and repairs and so forth. It's just how do we prioritize that and find the money to do that?
Okay. That makes sense to me. I know you guys do a great job with our parks, but the need is always going to outpace the resources. But just to make sure I understand, it sounds like if this 50,000 is approved, it'll be a mix of the routine maintenance work that's already been taking place, even with the limited budget, and then maybe some operational funding to supplement the Holcroft Park type of projects as they come up, and we try to conjure a few different funding sources together to pay for that type of work.
Right. I mean, going back to my first year here, actually the Park of the Year Fund wasn't even created until I think 2008, 2009. But it was originally intended to replace a lot of the really old play structures that needed to be replaced. So we did pick one a year, and we replaced Bessie Baker, we replaced Lindsay Park. We did a number of other parks, Colgate and Vittori, using that money. But in the last 20 years, we've replaced every playground in the city. So now we're seeing the wear and tear, the need for maintenance and so forth. And Holcroft was done back in 2003, but we obviously decided that was one that could be replaced right now, especially with some grant monies and things like that. So we spend it where we think it's best utilized. I try to get feedback from you folks as to when you have a need or a want, what we can do and when we can do it and so forth. And I'm always happy to write grants. We try not to be too greedy on the grant side, but when you need it, you need it. So whether it's CPC or park grants or land and water conservation grants, we're always happy to work in that direction. So.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Joy. I do have questions for Ms. Delakai, but I'll hold off until we get the recreation.
Let's hold one moment. Counselor Bowen, come back to that.
Thank you. Just wanted to add my thanks. Most of my questions have been covered. Appreciated the chance to meet in committee and get project updates. And I really appreciate too that in the online budget book there are highlights. There's sort of what to expect for the coming year with the level of funding. So my only question was, in those goals for fiscal year 25, you mentioned continuing to work to create new recreation facilities to meet changing demands and offering new recreation opportunities through new and existing youth and adult programs. And I just wondered if there were any you're particularly excited about in the coming year.
Well, again, I've probably been saying this for the last 5 or 6 years, but we have 20 courts in Beverly between basketball and tennis. Again, the tennis courts are getting back to pretty good shape. We'll be in great shape when we finish the 3 new ones. Some of our basketball courts are still in terrible shape, and Holcroft was one of them. And as you may know, we tried for a park grant for 3 years in a row or 2 years in a row to replace all the courts in Beverly, and we didn't get that because they weren't crazy about just paving. But so the Holcroft project, we were lucky enough to be able to include that in the total project. But that would be a goal of mine, is to get our basketball courts back into great shape, because some of them haven't been repaired or touched in a long time. We're replacing the backboards with new fiberglass backboards and hoops that the kids like and so forth. And actually part of our goal is to make more courts that are smaller in size that the kids can use, like the one at Peach Park, and that'll be the same size as the one at Holcroft, but it takes funding to do that, so, and each court probably is, you could guesstimate around $200,000 or more to do. Once we get the funding or can get some grants, we can do that. But that would be one of my goals for equipment. I mean, playground equipment, again, as needed, we'll work on replacing it or repairing it and so forth, but courts definitely, so.
Thanks.
Thank you, Counselor. Thank you, Mr. Doig. Do we want to take a question for the Board, the Health Department?
I do have a couple.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. We'll take those now. Ms. Delakai?
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Delakai, for being here. The first question that I have is regarding the consultant line item, and that's seeing a pretty significant increase to $140,000 in this year. In the printout, there was a brief description about the need for a biosafety consultant. Could you perhaps elaborate? Obviously, this is a pretty sizable number for a consultant. Could you just elaborate on what work will be taking place with this funding?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Counselor Sweeney. So sorry, can you hear me? Okay, there it goes. To elaborate on our consultant line, so our consultant is specific solely for our biological safety applications. Those are our biotech facilities we have in Beverly. They are a specific type of permit that we need to give in, due to a local regulation being adopted back in 2014. You need basically someone who has the expertise of an industrial hygienist to do that type of work, which our local Board of Health staff do not have that capacity or educational background to do so. Something that has been going on in the health department that has caught my attention is that we've had a major increase in the biotech companies in Beverly. Prior to my onboarding last year, I think we were permitting maybe about 7 biotech facilities. There are also ones currently that have received permits in the past that were not being followed up on, whether or not lack of oversight by the health department or budget constraints. But we estimate that there are going to be about 60 plus, maybe 70 biotech facilities in the community. To have our consultant review application for us is a minimum of $2,000. If the application is incomplete, it can be an additional $1,000 to $2,000. What we've done to combat that cost of our consultant is we've increased our biosafety permit fee from $250 to $500, and the Board of Health has added an additional application review fee it's currently $2,000, but per consultant's rate in case that changes. And that additional, we also have an incomplete application fee, which will also be based on the consultant's rate. So between $1,000 and $2,000, depending on the level of incompleteness. But we obviously try and make sure that we give our applicants all the tools that they need in order to avoid any additional fees. So we have put the cost of the consultant back on the permit holder rather than doing a revolving fund. Mr. Ailes recommended that we budget within the consultant line and that we will collect the permit fees and they will go back into the general revenue fund. So there will be basically a net zero for that and no additional cost to the city, and there might be some additional revenue from that extra increase in the 500 or 250 increase from our biosafety permit.
Okay, and that's very helpful. I appreciate that explanation, and that, makes this a much more, I understand why the increase is so significant here with that revenue. Is this an annual process, these inspections?
Yes, we're supposed to, they need to be all permitted on our calendar year, and we need to get to all of them with at least an annual inspection. So something, I know it was the director in the past that worked directly with the consultant, but because there's so many biotech facilities and just in the Cumming Center alone, it's going to be dispersed amongst me and all my staff members to kind of tackle on getting everyone appropriately permitted, because again, it's not fair that we have, repeating applicants that always come and get their permits where others, they know they need to get their permit and just haven't because the Board of Health hasn't done anything about it. And there might be a lot of companies that just don't even know this is a local requirement. So we're going to be doing some educational outreach and a cooperative approach to get them to comply with our local reg.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Delakai. That's helpful to know. And I'm glad to hear you guys are taking on that effort. The next question I have probably is one that's better answered by Mr. Ailes. It's regarding the sanitarian line. I see that when looking at the original budget for FY '24 and how that compares to the '25 recommendation, there's not a whole ton of movement, but that the actual spending is pretty significantly lower. In the comments on the printout here, it's referenced that half of the salary was paid through ARPA. Could you talk a little bit about why ARPA funding was applied to these two sanitarian positions? Were either of these new positions recently, and how does that interact with the final proposal here that we're seeing for the sanitarian line?
Don't go anywhere, because I might need you for some of the specifics, but happy to answer that question. I do want to, just for your reference, related to that consulting expenditure increase, I know Ms. Delakai mentioned that it's budget neutral.
Yep.
There's a corresponding revenue increase that is the second from the last revenue line in the revenue section of the budget. There was so we increased that revenue line correspondingly by $110,000, which will be the fees we collect as a result of these increased consulting costs. So if the consulting costs went away, so too would the revenue. So it's budget neutral.
Thank you.
Now, for the sanitarian, last year in fiscal '24, Ms. Delakai came to the administration and discussed the need for added work related to the sanitation or the sanitarian work that her office does. And at that point in time, we thought it was appropriate use of the ARPA funds that were available to begin to deal with some of the backlog. Is that fair? Backlog of some of the work that was needed. Because as you know, many of you know, ARPA, in addition to dealing with some of the pandemic-related issues that municipalities are facing, they also recognize that a big chunk of the ARPA funds could be used for lost revenue, effectively, a very broad category that could basically be used for general services. And so we deemed this to basically check both boxes in many ways. And so we brought on a third sanitarian at that point and funded that individual 100% through ARPA. As we approach FY '25, we know that the ARPA funds go through December 30th of calendar year 2024, so halfway through the fiscal year, but the need is still there for this third sanitarian. So in order to maintain a budget neutrality going into FY '25, it was our goal to maintain the same level of expenditures within the sanitarian line. And in doing so, what we did is we decided to take that third sanitarian, cover half of her salary through December, and then also cover half of the second sanitarian's salary through December as well. So effectively covering a full-time position and effectively level funding the budget for FY '25. Now, as we approach FY '26, we will certainly be evaluating the importance of that position. It's obviously one that we see a value in, and so we'll be working to try to find a way to maintain that function, that position, that workload within the health department. And so I would expect some sort of adjustment going into FY '26 in terms of cost. Yep.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ailes.
If I could jump in quickly, I believe for the 10 years I've been here that 2 inspectors has never been enough in the health department. So that was, adding that third inspector really is something that we collectively decided to do with the ARPA funds. As Mr. Ailes said, for this fiscal year, we're working it so that it doesn't impact the budget, but I would hope that a year from now, we'll be able collectively to annualize into the operating budget that third inspector. I just want to ask Ms. Delakai to tick off the things that the inspectors are responsible for, because I think as you hear it, you'll agree that there's just a volume that we need 3 inspectors, and, if there's a time when we can't fund it, we can't, but I think it's a priority.
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, to reiterate what Mayor Cahill has said, as well as Mr. Ailes, the need for our third inspector is dire. As I onboarded to the health department, we just had our senior sanitarian, Joe Reale, and the work that local boards of health are tasked with are extremely numerous due to what is designated to boards of health in the Mass General laws. And obviously, a lot of that are boards of health. Our board is not tasked with it necessarily, but the health department is, and our responsibilities are ever increasing, especially when a city council or town government decides to create local bylaws or ordinances. There's several departments that can deal with enforcement procedures, one of them being the health department. And I will say, from the time I've started in the health department, just seeing Joe attempting to tackle all of the different types of permitting and complaints we respond to. So just a kind of a quick overview of some of the things that we do. Food safety, food permitting, we do all the beach testing, of course, but we're gonna have a great beach year, so. We do the pool inspections, we do Title V septic systems, obviously the biosafety, we do keeping of animals, nuisance complaints, rodent complaints, housing cases, which take up a significant amount of time, especially with severely complex social service issues going on with those housing cases. To just name a few items that we do, there's so many things that we are tasked with. And honestly, I could even see a need for a fourth inspector, but I'm not going there. Because in the few months that we've had OpenGov open, where we're tracking all of our complaints, and maybe the 3 months that it's been up, we have close to 200 complaints open, split between 3 people, and trying myself to deal with some of them just because the complaints they continue to come in. And I will say this job takes a toll on individuals. It's not, obviously we see our job as educators and keeping the public safe, but it's not an easy job meeting someone every day where you might have to tell them they can't do something or that they need to fix something. And that does take a toll just on them mentally. And it is hard work, and to see someone, see a position go and to have just more pressure on only 2 inspectors, it would be significant. So please keep the sanitarian. And I will just say I've heard wonderful things from you counselors, as well as other departments and our constituent services director. We've had so many lovely complaints since I started here and have had a full staff with the response rate and dealing with issues that constituents have brought to us. And that just kind of makes me want to continue with what we're doing and put customer service at the forefront. And I think we need the staff that we have now to continue to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Delakai.
All right, thank you. Anyone else have a question for the health department?
Oh, not for that.
Or for Mr. Doig?
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have one question. I hope it's a fair question to ask. I know it's under community services, although it's not specifically recreation. So if this is not something that you have all the information now, but I was curious, under the senior center council on aging budget, the building maintenance line item, I noticed the note, 30-year-old building, replacement, repairs, updates of various components. When I've been at the senior center, a concern I've heard from folks there, users, not staff specifically, is worry also about the air circulation HVAC in that building. Mm-hmm. So I'm just curious if you, in doing planning with your team and specifically with the director of the senior center, if you have thoughts about that building's trajectory, specifically the HVAC, and if this maintenance line item is intended to catch some of that, or if that's a project we'll see down the line.
Well, yeah, the goal is to replace, I believe, 1 furnace and 1 of the air conditioning units. Again, I know that Chris Gomez has been working with Mike Collins for talking about how that can be done and when it can be done and so forth. So again, that's work that's in the plan. Sorry.
The AC is fixed.
Okay.
The AC is fixed. Excellent.
Excellent.
Great update.
Just in time. So,
Thank you.
President.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
you're welcome.
All right, thank you, Mr. Doig. With that, I would call our city solicitor, Stephanie Williams, to the podium, and we can go through the solicitor's office budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, councilors. And thank you for the opportunity to discuss the proposed budget for the law department for FY25. I think it's important, I know that most of you are aware of some of the facts about our city, but I think it's important to highlight them as we talk about the services the law department provides. We have 42,000 residents in the city. Our annual budget, I believe, exceeds $160 million this year. We have over 300 employees on the city side, 42 boards and commissions, and 30 departments, a city council with 9 members, and very active zoning, planning, Concom, licensing board, and Board of Health. So the core functions of the law department are to provide legal advice and guidance and representation to elected officials, boards, commissions, and employees day-to-day with respect to their official job responsibilities. And we also prosecute and defend all court cases and arbitrations. Currently, we have 16 active cases of litigation. Those are primarily land court cases, zoning cases, which we handle in-house. We advise employees throughout the city on laws pertaining to conflict of interest, procurement, public records law, among other things. We review contracts and draft contracts. This year, we track it. We've reviewed to date, or to the beginning of June, 154 contracts. Sometimes that can be extremely time-consuming given the length and the complexity of contracts. We manage claims that come in, pothole claims, burst sewer pipes, that type of thing. The insurance company generally reviews those, but we do have an in-house process for tracking, collecting information, and processing those. We draft and review ordinances and city council orders. For example, this year we assisted with the ADUs, many parking amendments, and as you know, the overall ordinance review for the city council. We draft home rule petitions. This fiscal year still included the charter review, and it was finalized, and that was extremely time-consuming. We attend meetings of the City Council and other public bodies. Currently tonight, Assistant Solicitor Jesse Dole is at the Licensing Board meeting over at the police station. Is he here? He's all done. That's how good he is. Thank you for all your hard work, Jesse. He wrote new rules and regulations for the Licensing Board and was working with them tonight to get those passed. We deal with employment and labor issues, grievances, arbitrations, and with so many employees in the city, you can imagine that those occur relatively regularly, sometimes mostly small, but sometimes larger issues. We have a regular stream of miscellaneous matters, some straightforward, some complex, often unique, which is why somebody needs to call our office. We deal with constitutional questions and issues, First Amendment issues, free speech, flag flying issues, public comment, and public meetings, and assist with code enforcement issues. We heard the health director a few minutes ago talking about how that's an ongoing issue that her department has really tackled, and we try to be there to provide support for them because they are very difficult, challenging issues to deal with. So this is all in the ordinary course of business. And as far as the City Council goes, many of you know we assist you and advise and help when you have constituent concerns and issues that you are trying to be responsive to, and we try our hardest to do an investigation and come up with solutions and answers for your constituents. And we draft ordinances, assist with open meeting law and procedural questions at meetings, and as needed, we assist the clerk's office with respect to things like open meeting law issues, publishing summaries of ordinances, and on occasion, election issues, some usually small. A couple of times we've had recounts. And so that is all just in the ordinary course. Without a crisis, all of this keeps all of us very busy. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank and point out Assistant Solicitors Jesse Dole and Beth Oldmixon and our paralegal Dylan Benson for their conscientious and hard work. From time to time, there are unexpected issues that come up, specialized projects, or a piece of litigation that we perhaps hadn't been anticipated. We haven't really had major litigation other than a few times in the last 10 years. Fortunately, we don't have anything right now. And that brings me to the outside counsel and litigation line item, which I know you often have questions about. Those line items are there to deal with situations when we are faced with some kind of specialized question that most lawyers these days in private practice, they do basically, they focus on a specific area of law. So there are occasions when it's in the city's best interest to hire somebody who specializes in a particular area of law. Most recently, I think the council will remember we had Ray Miare's firm help with the high voltage line. That was a good example. When we've had to do recounts, we have KP Law come in and help with that because, of course, we want to make sure that somebody who's done that multiple times does it, because that has to be done so that it's unimpeachable, essentially. We try to handle all litigation in-house. Some of the litigation expenses that we do incur, we would incur whether or not we have outside counsel or not. Things like deposition transcripts, filing fees, subpoenas, things of that nature, or we would have those costs whether or not somebody outside is handling them or not. I'd like to point out that, especially in an example is this year, some of our litigation is handled or defended by insurance counsel. There are cases in which we have a deductible, depending on what the kind of case it is. And so we've, in the first instance, try to look to the litigation line item to pay that deductible. Sometimes it can be as much as $25,000 if it's a public official lawsuit. And in other cases, less serious cases, it can be $10,000. So I have this year, and I don't even think I'm not sure it shows up in the expended year to date, but encumbered for the litigation line item, which right now is only showing expended year to date, a $25,000 purchase order for an insurance deductible, and that will cover March, April, and May, or April, May, and June, I think. And they only bill us quarterly. So I won't even get that bill until July. So those expended year-to-date numbers are deflated for a reason like that. And also, we try to have law firms bill us. They're required to bill us monthly, but some of them are better than others. So right now, I may only have bills from some of them through March or April. So, you know, we still have 2 or 3 more months of bills and money PO'd. That's not reflected in this expended, if you're wondering what the trajectory is on that column. I don't know if it's in, it's in your report, right? So I will pause to see if you have any questions at this point.
Thank you, Solicitor Williams, and I wanted to echo your thanks to the Assistant City Solicitors as well, Beth Oldmixon and Jesse Dole. They are incredibly responsive when we have needs, and none of the issues we bring them are incredibly straightforward, so I appreciate that. Questions or comments for the Solicitor's Office? Anybody? None. Okay. Seems like you did an incredible job presenting.
Great, well, my final words will be go Celtics.
Yeah,
so,
go
yeah.
Celtics. Thank you, Solicitor Williams.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that, we'll move on to our last department of the evening. It's a big one, Commissioner Collins and Public Services. How are you, Commissioner?
Good evening.
Sure.
Thanks for having me here, and just want to take a moment to recognize where my grandfather was 80 years ago today, and as I learned recently, a good friend of mine, Matt Bergeron, and his grandfather, in his very first mission in a B-24, was probably just getting home right about now from flying over in support of D-Day, so it's an important day. It helps me reflect on where my position is here and how grateful I am to be here, and how grateful I am for all of their service and everyone who's served since. And who will serve in the future, so.
Well said, Commissioner. Thank you.
And in that context, as these other departments have gone before me, it's a pleasure to work with everyone in the city. It's a well-run city, and I couldn't do my job without the other departments in the city, and most importantly, without the excellent service of the men and women of the Public Services umbrella. We have a large group of true professionals in every discipline, and I think the level of service we provide is really unmatched by any other city of comparable size. So proud to be a part of that team and proud to be here tonight.
Well, thank you. Any additions or subtractions to your budget you want to highlight?
I mean, it's somewhat a mostly level-funded budget, nothing really earth-shattering coming or going. We could use a lot more money, we could use a lot more help. I know we talk about the help every year. We look back over the last 2 years and we saw, almost 15 new employees, and we saw 18 go out the door. So we're hiring as fast as we can. We're losing just as fast, either through retirement or attrition, people going to other jobs. So it's a struggle, but that's a struggle we share with virtually every industry in the country at this time. So we're not alone. I hear it when we talk to our contractors out there, our engineering firms. It doesn't matter where you go. It's a struggle right now. But
So I guess in that respect, there's a line item for a director of security position. Is that a new role or is that a backfill of one?
it's something that we've been doing for a long time. Little known fact that it's something that has been part of our umbrella for a very long time. I guess going back to even the construction of the high school and beyond that, where our first foray into that world is we built the public safety radio system that serves the city to this day. And we maintain and operate the backbone radio system that police and fire use. That evolved into the next thing that we started to get involved with was building controls, because we took over all the city buildings at some point in my tenure. And the building controls, all of the major buildings, the library, all the schools, the police station, have sophisticated building management systems in them that take constant daily and through the night manipulation and monitoring to keep the buildings running efficiently. And then along with the high school was our first foray into the surveillance and security with the sophisticated system that came with the high school, which we have since expanded out to all of the schools and a number of city buildings, which covers access control, intrusion detection, and security cameras. So those are some of the things that we have always operated, and we've done it through the excellent staff we have. So this is it's not really, I've never felt it was really fair to be putting the burden of this work on somebody just because we have them working for us. So we're trying to formalize this position because it deserves to be formalized, because these are all critical functions to keep the school safe and secure, to keep the schools comfortable, keep the library comfortable. We do the best we can, so these things take constant manipulation. So this is just a reallocation of an existing position into a new role. I will add that it is something that needs to be and is being actively negotiated with the unions at this time as well, just so I want to say that out loud so the union hears it and they know that we're going to work with them in good faith to make sure that we come to a good resolution on that.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner, appreciate that. Other questions? Councilor Feldman.
Thanks. I had two questions. The first one is in the Public Works. There's a Public Works line item, and then there's a subcategory that just also says Public Works. And it used to be at 0, and now it's at $763,000. What is that?
You talking in ClearGov?
It's, it's the,
Yeah, just, all we're doing is we're reorganizing how the budget is configured. So we're taking like positions, administrative positions, and we're just grouping them all into one division. So it doesn't change anything, it's just, the administrative positions were scattered throughout engineering and public services. And we're just trying to be a little bit more, I'll use the word transparent, in how they're organized so that they're all together. And it also recognizes our history that we were a number of individual budgets, but this is really one operation. Everyone works together under one umbrella, under the public services umbrella. Engineering and public works are hand in hand. Engineering is much more of our public face. They have to deal with the walk-in public. That's who most of the public sees, other than if they interact with the crew in the street or something like that. But it's just a recognition on how the department is really actually organized.
okay, that makes sense. And then, and in that same line though, or just below that, there's the sanitation line. And I'm wondering, is that exclusively the contract with Republic? What is the sanitation? Is that?
Yeah, there's also the Sanitation Enterprise Fund, which covers the other half of it. So this is the city's contribution.
But it's all dedicated to that
Yeah,
contract?
yeah, yes, it is.
It's that and the transfer to the landfill monitor.
Yeah, there is, as Mr. Ailes is pointing out, there's one small transfer to, we have to now and forever monitor the old landfill on Brimble Avenue. So we're monitoring the groundwater and any emissions, which, just for the record, that landfill is old. There was not a lot of organic matter in it, so it doesn't put out a lot of methane like your typical landfill would, but we have to monitor it to make sure that it is not putting out methane in any capacity that we would want to address. So there's a small transfer to a fund to continue the monitoring
Well,
of that.
residents of Ward 5 appreciate your vigilance on that landfill, so. Okay, those are my two questions. Thanks.
Madam President?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Commissioner. I had a question about a line that on the ClearGov appears broken out under highway and maintenance, I think. Or it's on page 89 in the older budget book. It's line item 58757, which is capital outlay, but it says purchase equipment. I'll give you a minute, sorry. I know that we're all flipping through books. So page 89.
Yeah, it's probably doesn't look like it's 89 in mine, but, oh, sorry. No, go ahead with your question anyway.
Okay. So the line item is labeled as capital, it's under capital outlay. There's two categories on ClearGov: parking supplies and purchase equipment. So this is $350,000 in purchase equipment. I was just curious if you could share what your plans are for that, or what you've sort of scoped out that would be falling under that line item.
Yeah, we are, $350,000 is the price of a single truck now, unfortunately. So we would try to buy a single what we call a medium-duty dump truck, which is what you see most of our work being done by, hauling gravel, plowing snow, that type of thing. So we are in desperate need for several more trucks just to replace some aging, things that are 10, 12 plus years old that are really rotted out and way beyond their expected lifespan. And the world of big trucks has become, it feels like this won't mean anything to anyone, but this feels like the late 70s of cars, before they went between fuel injection and carburetors. It was just a miserable time. So the emissions, that it changes on a yearly basis, and it is the bane of our existence. It is what keeps the trucks off the road. It's what keeps the fire trucks off the road. It's what keeps everything off the road now, is because there's some little computer chip that is feeling ill today and has absolutely no impact on how the truck runs, but you can't use the truck without it. So.
Thank you. Thank you.
Counselor Sweeney?
Thank you, Commissioner Collins, for being here. I have a few questions for you, but I want to start with one for Mr. Ailes on this specific topic. of the 350 for the dump trucks. Is there a reason that we're looking to the operating budget to fund this instead of free cash or another source that would seem more appropriate for a pretty large capital purchase like a dump truck?
Yes, I mean, generally, the types of capital that we try to roll into the operating budget, and this isn't always the case, but in theory, what we try to do, and we see it in the police department, you see it in the DPW, is when you have a department that has a regular annual recurring need for capital investment, we try to build it into the annual operating budget so it maintains a certain level of investment year in, year out that gets built into the capital budget. So on the police side, for example, you typically see 1, 2, or 3 vehicles being purchased every year. Similarly, within the DPS budget, there is always a need for new equipment. It's not that there's a specific piece of equipment that Mike says, hey, Brian, I think I need a piece of equipment this year. He has literally hundreds and hundreds of pieces of equipment that they can always replace. There's no shortage of need for investment in this area. So if we can continue to maintain a certain level that allows him to replenish the most needed areas, that can at least continue to keep him afloat. And as, large or unusual needs may arise, then we can look to free cash or a one-time use to address that in the future.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ailes. Staying in the Highway and Maintenance Division, there are 2 sets of positions, the carpenters and the heavy motor equipment operators, where it looks like there's a jump versus last year's budget. I might be reading it wrong for either of them, so correct me, but just to confirm, are we adding staff in either category of positions, carpenters and motor?
Just reclassifying some existing positions into a higher grade. So this is a position has become vacant, so it was at 1 grade where we're gonna fill it with a slightly higher grade because we're trying to do anything we can to attract new candidates. It used to be I could bring in, I know the grades won't mean anything to you, but I could bring in a new employee at a grade 11 and with little experience, and I knew that I could bring them in, help them get licenses, train them, and then I could post a different job and it helped them get to, say, a 14, which would be beneficial also because they felt like there was some change, there's some recent benefit. Because otherwise, the way our pay structure always worked is you started at the 3rd step of our pay scale, and by contract, 6 months later, you went to the 4th step, and then that's it. That was the end of your career in terms of step raises. It's just COLAs after that, whatever the union would negotiate. So if I could start somebody at 11 and then train them, and within a year or so, get them to a 14, they felt like they've made some change, and so there'd be a couple of steps early in their career where they felt like there's some benefit. It's getting much harder. I need to offer people as much as I can coming in the door, so we've reclassified just a couple of existing vacant positions.
Okay,
So
but
there's
the
a
number of positions is going to stay the same?
Number of positions is the same, just a modest increase in existing vacant positions
Okay.
to try to attract.
That makes sense,
Try to
so I
attract
appreciate that explanation. And the last question I have for the moment on training, going back to that Public Works administrative budget, it looks like, even though it's not a huge amount of money, the training budget's jumping from a few $1,000s to $15,000. Is there any specific trainings that are driving this increase?
There are dozens and dozens of trainings that we are required by law for the staff to undergo to comply with, whether it be OSHA requirements or certain licenses, and most of the budgets did not have any training components built into them. So we're spending this money anyway. This is real money. We looked back at what we're spending generally on training, and I gotta tell you that the number that we've proposed in the budget is really far short of what our real costs should be, but it's what we can afford to do time-wise right now. But this is a minimum level of training. So it's based on what our actual costs have been historically for training. So we're just trying to, again, be upfront about where we're spending the money.
Okay,
And we're also trying to recognize the fact that we believe, and I'm sure you do as well, that it is vitally important to keep our staff trained, A, to keep them safe, and to keep up on the latest technology.
no, I certainly agree with that, so, thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Bowen?
Thank you. I have a couple of follow-ups on the questions that have been shared so far, and then potentially some others. So just following up on that last one, I had the same question because it looked like there's the 15,000 in the new sort of administrative piece of the budget, 15,000 in the engineering line, and then other, smaller amounts sprinkled through some of the other areas. So just wanted to clarify if that 30,000 in the sort of carve-out administrative and engineering is for all employees across all departments, or is for specific things. So it sounds like
Every
to
single
Councilor Sweeney's
employee,
question, it was more
every single
broad.
employee needs some level of training. Some of the training is done locally, some of it you have to fly to. So yes, it'll be spread out over everybody over the course of a year. But yeah, there's a lot to keeping the staff up to date. And it's, the things we're doing now, it's a much more complicated world than it used to be in a lot of respects.
Okay, so just those two pools of money are for more than just the 10 or 15
Oh, yeah.
staff in those. It's
Oh,
for
yeah.
the whole set of public works,
Yeah.
public services. Okay. And then on the question about the highway equipment purchase, we had 250,000 budgeted last year. I think had that same plan of that's probably enough for a piece of equipment. It looks like the actual spending is 970,000. So was hoping to just hear what we were able to make happen this year within that funding that we can't commit to doing next year, but obviously there were either grants or reallocations within the budget or.
Yeah, mostly
or other things.
reallocations. As the fiscal year gets to a point of certainty, we're able to look at the budgets and see, what positions have we not been able to fill? And we can call that money and try to repurpose it, particularly towards equipment, which is always sort of the plan. We're trying to see if we can repair the fleet that way. It's been particularly challenging in the last couple of years because our chosen manufacturer has had an incredibly difficult time getting components to build trucks, and initially pushed out lead times to multiple years, and then most recently had told us that they couldn't even get trucks at all. So we've been forced to go to other manufacturers, and we recently came across 2 trucks that actually existed for real, in the real world, not a future slot on an assembly line. And so we were able to put together the money to buy, one will be a completed truck and the other is just a chassis that will look to this coming fiscal year to try to upfit the chassis with the body and a sander and a plow and all the accoutrements. And then we try to fill in, there's a myriad of other things. Everything we buy is ridiculously expensive. We bought a new infield grooming machine, which is why when Little League teams and softball teams come from other towns and they scratch their heads and why do your fields look like this and ours are so bad? I'm like, well, because we groom them twice a week. It's just like nobody else does that, but it's what sets Beverly apart. It's what sets our sports programs apart. So we have to buy good equipment to keep the fields in that kind of condition. But that piece of equipment is really expensive for what it is. And other things, we bought a lift that'll help us maintain the buildings, and that we periodically rent them, and they're expensive to rent, so now we bought a used one. We look to, something like that, we would never buy a new piece of equipment, but a used low-hour piece of equipment fit into our portfolio great, and it expands our capabilities tremendously. We've used it dozens of times since we purchased it, so we've practically paid for the rental cost of what it would have been. And, we've tried to fill in with all sorts of smaller pieces of equipment here and there. The need is so great. Things like our air compressors, which run the jackhammers and things like that, they're 1995 air compressors. So, that's well beyond what is reasonable to keep a piece of equipment. But that's the kind of stuff, if I want to buy a new air compressor, I haven't priced one out lately, but I'm going to guess they're $50,000+, $60,000 just for this little trailer compressor. And I might even be off on that. That might be low. So it's just everything we buy is just a staggering price.
Thank you. I know that those equipment costs are sort of an ongoing list, so it's helpful to know the difference between a year in which we have vacancies or underspend and are able to stretch that further, where that's able to get us this coming year, if those vacancies are filled, that we may fall back behind. Would love to put in a plug for, at some point over this fiscal year, sitting down and looking through where we are with that equipment inventory so that we have a sense of what's coming, where those gaps are, if as a city we're under or over investing in that.
Yeah, if we ever embarked on a traditional equipment replacement plan like any other large community would, you'd choke on the price tag. It would never happen. I just know that the money does not exist, so we have to do the best we can with the fleet we have, with the city's financial position. It just wouldn't happen.
Understood, and also as a sort of lay person in the public services world, seeing what that equipment plan looks like and being able to see that gap would still be very helpful, because for folks who are in it every day, I'm sure you feel it acutely and know it inside and out, but for the rest of the city, for all of us to be able to understand what that really looks like, even if it is, I think we've seen with the roads and sidewalks budget, seeing the real numbers of what it costs to rebuild the road. And
I was just going to make that analogy, that it's a lot like that. We at least know the size of the problem. Doesn't make us feel any better knowing that we're tens of millions of dollars short from where we need to be, but it at least gives you an idea.
Yes, I'll say it does make me feel better to know the scope of a problem and be able to make a plan around which pieces of it we can tackle when and how. So we'd love to be able to do that with equipment as well.
So good segue to roads and sidewalks, Commissioner. I know the budget, the approach this year is to fund $2 million of free cash to sort of equate to what we spent last year. I guess, are you comfortable with that approach? Is there any impact to you in terms of how that money gets there?
Yeah, I just acknowledged that, the number of years we went with no city contribution to paving, and only in the last year or two of Mayor Scanlon's administration were they able to put some money towards it, and then Mayor Cahill's put a significant amount of money towards roads and sidewalks each year that he's been in office. So while it's like far short of what we really need, it's so much more than I thought we would ever get, because I thought we would just be resigned to spending the Chapter 90 money year after year after year, which in and of itself is woefully inadequate, and despite what the legislature says, is still funded at 2/3 of what it used to be. So when there should be no patting on the back when we get a supplemental appropriation of Chapter 90, because we don't get back to where we used to be nearly 20 years ago. It's just shocking to think that how much less we're getting. That's across the board, I guess, that's across the board with state aid. It's a lot less than it was in every respect, and that really has hurt every community. We're not alone in that. But yes, the city's contribution, I think, is as good as it can be. It's a lot. We can do a lot with that, and these next few years will seem like a lot because we also have the money from the 115 kV project, which will address quite a few local roads. So it'll seem like there's a lot more work. And, you pair that with the $12 million that MassDOT and the state are putting into Bridge Street right now. So there'll be a lot of road work that's going to happen in the next year to two, and things will get a lot better in a lot of places. But, road work didn't get any cheaper. So we're still woefully short of where we are, but, you know, I give the mayor and finance director credit for putting the amount of money that we are putting into it, just given, I've seen the other side of it. I know how bad it can be. And it's a, you know, I think as a city, we're doing the best we can.
Counselor Feldman?
Thank you. In terms of the roads and sidewalks and the funding for that, if we were to say, if there were to be more money at some point in time put into that, can you help me understand if that, you had said, you know, you're lose staff, that like there's turnover in terms of the workers. Are we doing all of the paving and the roads and sidewalks work ourselves, or is this being contracted out? And what is the capacity of the dollar amount that is allocated that we could cover if we were funded at 5 million or something? How much could the city take on if we are doing this in-house?
Yeah, I can remember years ago being threatened with, what if we gave you all the money? What would you do? And no, I mean, almost all of the sidewalk and road work is done by contractors. A lot of the prep work ahead of it is done by city forces. You know, the water we try to, if we can, we try to replace all the water services that need to be upgraded before we pave, just so we can reduce the chance of having to dig the roadway up after the fact. We try to fix the drainage. It is, with paving, it's a war against water. I've said that before. And we try to make sure that drainage is adequate, maybe add drainage as we're paving. So that kind of work is generally done in-house. We saw recently with the work we're doing on Hale Street, how unbelievably expensive it is to bring in contractors to do the utility work. You know, in that case, for 2,000 feet, we're paying $1 million, and I'm buying the pipe. That doesn't even include the pipe, which to me is just staggering to see that the cost for contractors has gone up as much as it has. Anyway, so we would just, if we had unlimited funds, we would either, I believe the contractors we have now could probably expand. Certainly on the sidewalk side, we get 2, 3, 4 crews, whatever it is. And on the paving side, if they knew going into a year that we were going to be spending at that level, they would probably try to balance their own workload. But that's one of the challenges we have as a state with how road construction is funded, is it makes it very difficult for these contractors to know. Because if we don't know what the bond bill is going to be 10 years from now for transportation in the state, they can't invest in equipment and personnel in any way that will allow them to, you know, quickly spool up to these larger capacities. So, but, you know, we do think the contractor capacity is out there right now. If we had more money, we could do more work. It's mostly contracted work. And if we became the bottleneck, then we would have to talk and say, well, can the city come up with more money to have contractors do some of that prep work? The things that we believe make a better end product for the city that protect our investments, the huge investments we are making in the road network. Because that's really what we're trying to do, is we're trying to protect the money that we're spending today to make sure that it lasts as long as it should.
Good, Counselor? Okay, thank you. Counselor Sweeney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Got it third time there. And Councilor Feldman asked my question on roads and sidewalks, so I appreciate that response. And I'll just note, in line with the response you gave earlier, Mr. Ailes, about kind of the recurring expenses, I understand the pressures on the operating budget that have resulted in this decision to shift a greater portion of what the city's contributing to roads and sidewalks to free cash. But I view it as something we need to commit to every year at this level. So I would hope that if we're making this shift, it's what is the first year of a multi-year commitment of putting a few $1 million, if it's from free cash and not the operating budget, toward this road and sidewalk work. I do have a question on the public property division, the green initiatives line. There's a description here. I'm assuming that the bulk of this funding is what's paying the consultants that are working with the city on Obeah Park and, work that we would hope to continue to build off on Lynch Park. But other than money that's used for consultants or for grant matches, are there any other notable expenses that have come out of this line in the fiscal year that we're about to end and that are maybe budgeted for this coming fiscal year outside of that consultant and grant work?
No, it largely amounts to those type of things, whether it be, matches to grants and things like that, that we can use this money to leverage other people's money and get a lot more work done, so.
We're not buying anything straight up or otherwise looking to use this for equipment purchases or anything
It's
locally?
generally not what it's intended for. The rest of the public properties budget is, if we're just buying equipment, rest of the public properties budget is typically dedicated to that.
Okay. And the last question I have on that same line, there's a mention here about funding being derived from a landfill lease agreement, whether it's Mr. Ailes or you, Commissioner Collins. Could somebody elaborate on what that means?
Yeah, it's the solar panels on the old Brimble Ave landfill.
Okay, so that's the credits that we get from the solar panels?
No, it's strictly a land lease on that, in that instance, if I'm not out
Okay.
of line. So in that case there, rather than like Halen Road, where we're buying net metering credits or some sort of a PPA with one of the other solar arrays, in that case there, we just lease them a piece of land. There are a lot of other pieces there are other ways we're transacting with that solar array, but on its face, what the city did was lease a piece of land to somebody for a purpose. That happens to be a solar array. That brought a lot of other benefits to the city, but that's what all that is.
Okay, and in a dollar amount, is that about the $80,000 figure that goes out of this line item, the amount that we take in the lease annually?
The lease, there's multiple components to that agreement.
Okay.
The lease alone is about $120,000 a year.
Got it.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Ailes.
Yeah.
Okay, Counselor Spang?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know to whom this question would go, but I was curious in thinking about the transfers from some of the enterprise funds to the general fund for, I know it's less in water this year, but for sewer and sanitation, different things like that. Whether there would come a time or when it would make sense to leave that money in enterprise funds to build for future capital needs that may be coming, like replacing more water main or sewer?
Yeah, the process of those chargebacks, and you're referring to the chargeback coming into the general fund as revenue? Yeah. So that's really an accounting mechanism to try to properly account for support services and/or costs that are directly incurred within the general fund in support of enterprise work. And so the way the state looks at it, and we're required to look at it, is those enterprise funds, and we're going to talk about a few of them here, are designed to kind of be their own cost center, their own like business, if you will. They bring in their own revenue and they spend their own money, and it's for a particular purpose. The airport, the golf and tennis club, the water department, the sewer department, and there's like a wall around it, okay? But we know that we have costs that we incur for the city government. For instance, your work you do, the work I do, the work Mr. Collins does, the work the solicitor's office does, the work the IT department does. These are all costs that are contained within the general fund budget, funded through taxpayer money, that seek to support those independent enterprise funds. And so the methodology that we use, which are acceptable, accountable methodologies, is to recoup the appropriate amount of money back from those enterprise funds in support of the services that were provided centrally. In addition to that, and the largest portion of those chargebacks have to do with direct employee costs. So we budget the healthcare centrally within the general fund. You don't see a healthcare cost within water and sewer, yet there are employees within water and sewer. So we know that employee X, who is a water department employee, signed up for the Blue Cross Blue Shield family plan, so we know how much the taxpayers are being charged to pay his premium or her premium, and therefore we recoup that back through these chargebacks. So every year we sit down and we do a really thorough modeling of this, and we account for all these little specific pieces in an acceptable accounting methodology. It's called an indirect cost allocation plan. And that's how we derive what are the appropriate charges. And some years it can go up, some years it can come down, but it's all based on what we call allocable bases of chargeable costs. Okay.
Thank you. Counselor Bowen?
Thank you. I wanted to just go back and clarify quickly, the Security Communications and Integration Director was described in the summary as a shifting of a position. So is that budget neutral? I looked for whether there was a reduction.
There's a slight delta to the positive. It's because in most communities, this job would pay double what we're offering at this time, if not more, honestly. So there is a slight, 15,000, something like that, increase between the old position and the new position.
And so is there a reduced position somewhere else in the?
There is a position offset there. It's a 14221 51175. That's 58,000.
Sorry, which one was that? I'll write it down this time.
So it's in highway, building maintenance, highway and building maintenance section, which is 84, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And then I had one other unrelated question.
Unrelated, yep. Go ahead, Counselor Bowen.
Thank you. In part because Counselor Houseman isn't here, but I will try and make it quick. Just an update on the cemetery plan. It looks like the cemetery budget is sort of the same as it's always been. The fencing line that we've asked about in the past is zeroed out. I know in previous discussions, it was another one of those cases where it's not quite enough to do anything meaningful. So in this budget, it's zeroed out. Sounds like that will mean no work on cemetery fencing in this coming fiscal year.
Not within our budget. It would have to be money that would be appropriated somewhere else, because we've had a number of working sessions with the counselor and with the public open forums to talk about the future of not just Central, but all the cemeteries, and try to work towards working through a master planning process, trying to get input from all sides. And as I've mentioned in those, our budget supports us cutting the grass twice a month, pretty much. That's it. So anything beyond that, there's a trust that helps us plant and maintain trees at Central Cemetery. But other than that, it's, the budget's pretty limited. We can cut grass twice a month and we can bury people. That's about it. So anything other than that is going to have to be funded somewhere else. The master planning process will try to help us prioritize what those expenditures might be, and how do we fund them, and in what order. So it's coming along. I don't off the top of my head know when we might be complete with the process, but it's coming to a closure, and we hope to have something to share at a future, probably in the fall, given the schedule. But yeah, we'll. Like I said, we've had a number of public meetings and gotten a lot of good input from a lot of stakeholders. It's cemeteries are valuable spaces to us, to everyone involved, and we look forward to trying to come up with. This isn't our first crack at this. We tried to do this a long time ago because it had occurred to us that there are too many interesting features at Central Cemetery, for instance, to just be an accident. It seems like somebody with a planning mind had a hand in how these things evolved. And we searched for a very long time to see if there was any evidence of some famous landscape planner who had touched our cemetery, but found no evidence of that. So we were trying to figure out how to tie all of those unique elements together. because, you know, they are, Central is particularly a pretty place, so we hope to do our best to enhance and preserve it for the future.
Okay, so we've got enterprise funds as well. Any questions on any of those? Mr. Perry, you've been quiet tonight. Anything you want to add on any of the topics discussed, or?
Yeah, some confusion on my part here. I was originally informed with regard to the security position that was asked that the position was transitioning out of the Water Enterprise Fund, but I'm just told that's not the case now, so that's all right. So I'll beat up Mr. Ailes on that one. So, yeah, in terms of the general fund, it appears, based on the new information I got, there is no real, there's no more FTE increase here with regard to the budget. So I just want to clarify that, because I know some of you have talked to me about that.
Thank you. Any other questions, counselors? Counselor Bowen?
Thank you. On the enterprise fund side, we talked at the last meeting with Mr. Ailes about the water and sewer sort of trying to reduce expenditures this year, given overall cost pressures, and just would love to get your take as well on where we're at, particularly with, you know, knowing there are major capital investments needed in an aging system, and just sort of how you're looking at that for the year ahead.
There's a lot to do. It's just a staggering amount of work to be done. That is one of the places where I have the hardest time filling positions, because it's cold, wet work. It's miserable. But the crew that we have is awesome. They do such great work. And they kill it every day. So I need to be able to fill those positions and double the amount of work we're putting out, because there's just so much to do. And even at that, it's not enough. So the water system in particular, both water, sewer, drain, all need massive investment. So I don't even know where to even start. If you got a very specific question, I could try to answer that, but, you know, there's a lot to do.
Specific question, what about the status of the Hale Street Water Project?
The contract's been awarded. It's, you know, since we got the funding, it takes, the city's internal process takes some time to plug and chug to get, you know, because then the contractor they have to go get bonds and things like that. So there's a lot of handshaking that takes place. It can take, you know, a month and a half, 2 months. I don't know what the contractor's schedule is yet, because it would only have just become real to them in the last few weeks. And I had heard through other people that contractor had taken on a tremendous amount of work. So we may not be their first priority right now. But I'll get you, we'll update the council through our normal process on exactly what their schedule looks like. They haven't created a schedule yet, so we don't know. But we're trying to push to get them, because we believe it's a fairly cut and dry job. So hopefully it'll be attractive to them. In between bigger jobs, they can just come slam this one out. So we hope it'll fit well. They're a good contractor. We hope it'll fit well into their portfolio.
Thank you. Appreciate that update. Councilor Bowen?
Thank you. I found one other more specific question. It looks like there is a new strategy in the sewer lines to have co-op student workers coming on board, and just wondered if that was something that in other departments could help with some of the staffing challenges. I know you have a history of sort of taking people and bringing them through, growing with the organization.
That's worked very well for me with my assistant, hiring him as a co-op nearly 20 years ago. So it's something that we strongly believe in. We had proposed a more formal look at internships and co-ops in our budget, but we felt that for this particular fiscal year, we're going to do those things, but we're going to try to find other ways within our operating budget to make those things work. We've established a really good connection. It took some time to get over some initial stiction, but we've got a really good relationship with Essex Tech now, and we've become their go-to for their best and brightest. And we've gotten some awesome students from the tech. We're trying to keep at least one in each division rotating through all the time. And it's been a great relationship both ways because they learn a lot. We learn from them. These are young kids with a totally different perspective on the world than we're used to. And gives us some faith that there is some really good talent out there. But we are definitely going to continue to support that to try to train as many people and hopefully bring them into the Public Works umbrella. But if nothing else, we're going to try to give this some really good real-world experience and leave them better off for it.
Mr. Perry, do you want something to share?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I do want to comment just briefly. If anything, hopefully if former Councilor Lang is watching this, he'll be happy with me, because he used to beat me up on this years ago. Just briefly about the SESD allotment here is, I don't know if you're aware of it, the SESD handles a lot of our surge systems. We get billed on an annual basis. The budget this year for the SESD is $4,739,342. It only went up by $47,000, a little bit more than that. So my compliments to Commissioner Collins. I don't know what he did there, but thank you for that. So it was a pretty good deal. We get allocated a little over 18% of the percentage of the SESD budget. There's others, Middleton and Salem and others, the commissioner can tell you. He serves on the board. He, years ago, invited me over there. One of the things I want to, you get beaten up enough here, I guess I'll give you a little compliment, but a couple of years ago when I was reviewing the audit reports of the SESD, there was a problem with the way they were allocating the OPEB trust funds and revocable trust funds, and I sat with Mike quite a bit. It took him a couple of years to convince his colleagues over there, but they turned it around and improved some of the budgeting processes over there, actually in the way we get hit on OPEB costs. So I just wanted to, it got done. It took a while, and I just thought it was important that the community know that Mr. Collins, as representative of SESD, did a pretty good job there. And it's really dry, boring stuff when I'm talking about, but it's really important stuff when it comes to financial matters, and I just thought the council should be aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Okay. How are we feeling, councilors? We good? All right, so thank you, Commissioner. I think we're good for tonight. I think that wraps up our agenda for this evening. We'll come back next Tuesday, June 11th, and we have on our schedule Dr. Chirocek from the Beverly Public Schools and Dr. Riccio and Paul Manzo from Essex Tech, and we'll review those budgets, so look forward to that. Again, thank you to Mr. Ailes and the mayor and Mr. Perry and all the department heads for being here and for all their work. And with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn the committee of the whole. All in favor? Aye. And I would entertain a motion to adjourn the Committee on Finance and Property.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.